I wasn't supposed to be home yet. Normally I'd be finishing my last stretch at Hamilton Park by now, looping around the trail with the same playlist I've used for years. But something felt off today. My calf started twinging at mile 3, and instead of pushing through like I usually do, I turned around. A part of me wants to believe it was just physical discomfort. Tight muscle, worn shoes, but I think, deep down, I was already alert to something I hadn't put into words. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. That hour between night and morning when everything looks uncertain. Our block was still asleep. Porch lights flickering, sprinklers humming. I let myself in through the side door and dropped my keys in the bowl a little more quietly than usual. As I passed the bedroom, I heard Lydia's voice. It stopped me cold. Not the fact that she was speaking, but how she was speaking. The tone. It was quiet, low, almost hushed, like something she didn't want the walls to hear. The cadence was gentle. Every word was careful and warm. A softness I hadn't heard in a while. Not in that way. At first I couldn't make out the words. But then I caught something. Wish I could have stayed longer last time. Then a pause. Then laughter. Light. Effortless. I stood there in the hallway, not moving. Something in my chest went tight. I know Lydia's voice. I've heard it angry, excited, exhausted, professional, sarcastic. This wasn't any of those. This was int asterisk mate. Familiar. A tone that didn't belong in a work call, or with a casual friend, or even the version of me she'd been distant with lately. She didn't know I was home. And for the first time in our 3 years living together, I realized I was eavesdropping on my own life. Then silence. A gentle click. The conversation was over. I heard the phone being set down. Sheets shifting. I stepped back and opened the front door again, this time loudly, letting it slam just enough to announce myself without sounding deliberate. I waited a beat, then casually walked toward the kitchen. She was already there, perfectly composed. A soft robe tied neatly at the waist, sleeves rolled just enough to show her wrist tattoo, the small minimalist wave she got during a beach trip we still talked about sometimes. Coffee cup in hand, phone face down on the counter. Her hair was slightly curled, not messy like someone who'd just woken up. Her nails were done, subtle, neutral polish. She looked pristine. "Hey babe," she said, smiling without skipping a beat. "You're back early." "Yeah," I said, pausing just long enough to register her eyes. They met mine. Steady. Leg cramped up. She gave a concerned wince. "Oof, that S asterisk CKs. Want me to grab the foam roller?" "Nah, I'll stretch it out later." I moved to pour my own coffee. My hand hovered over the mug rack just a second too long. Her phone buzzed quietly. No preview. Just the vibration. She didn't check it. "Who were you talking to just now?" I asked it lightly, like it was nothing. Just making conversation. She barely blinked. "Oh, Jamie. From the strategy team. He's been unreachable all week, and I needed to get his input on the Greystone pitch." There was no hesitation. She reached for her phone and casually opened her calendar app. Not the call log. I noticed. Everything about her tone was calm, collected. I took a sip of coffee. Too hot. Burned my tongue a little. "You're calling your coworker at 6:30 in the morning now?" She laughed. "He's in Berlin. Time zones, remember?" I nodded slowly. "Right." And just like that, it was closed. No fidgeting. No extra explanation. The coffee steamed. The smell of her lotion, the one I liked, lavender and eucalyptus, filled the air between us. Everything looked so normal. And yet, nothing about it felt that way. I glanced over at the windowsill where she usually kept her ring while doing dishes or working in the garden. Empty. Again. She'd been saying it was getting resized, but that was 3 weeks ago. I never followed up on it because it sounded reasonable. Now, I started to question why I hadn't asked. She leaned against the counter across from me, sipping slowly. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said too quickly. "Just tired." She tilted her head like she was trying to read me, then smiled again. That same practiced smile, warm but detached. The kind that says everything is fine even when it's not. My eyes drifted toward her laptop, closed on the island, charger unplugged. A new habit lately. She used to leave it open, work windows cluttered, always in the middle of something. Now it stayed shut like a door to another life. She caught my glance. "You're staring." My laptop. Wasn't, I said, lying. Just zoning out. She smiled again and pushed herself off the counter. "I need to start getting ready. Big day." "Big presentation?" "Yeah. Greystone revisions. Gotta win them back from Knox and Hamilton." She breezed past me, fingers brushing my shoulder lightly, like an afterthought. It used to be affection. Now it felt like punctuation. I stayed in the kitchen, staring into the middle distance for a while. My coffee went cold. Her robe belt was still tied perfectly. Too perfectly. The lipstick stain on the coffee cup was faint, fresh, meaning she'd already been sipping before I came in. I picked up her mug when she left and held it for a second. Still warm. I don't know why that detail mattered so much, but it did. My brain kept circling back. The voice, the laughter, the exactness of her response. No fumbling, no delay. And the call history? I checked her phone once before. A year ago. I felt bad about it afterward. Nothing was there, and I hated that I doubted her. But this morning I checked again, while she was in the shower. The call history was clean. Too clean. No incoming, no outgoing, no FaceTime logs, no recents at all. Who clears their call log before 7 a.m.? I told myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe she'd done it automatically. Maybe her phone glitched. Maybe it was just a work call. But I knew better. I know Lydia. I know how detail-oriented she is. I know how she organizes chaos, always 3 steps ahead. And I know that when she wants to distract someone, she does it not with lies, but with just enough truth. Her SK*LL was never deception. It was redirection. And that's what this felt like. A magician's hands, expertly moving attention away from the trick. For the rest of the day, I went through the motions. Answered emails. Sat through meetings I didn't hear a word of. Stared at reports I couldn't process. The image of her standing there, robe, coffee, calm smile, kept replaying in my head, like a scene that had been too perfectly staged. That evening I watched her closely. Too closely. I felt like a stranger in my own home, studying body language like it was evidence. She laughed at dinner, told me a story about a coworker's dog escaping a Zoom call. I nodded, smiled when appropriate. But something had fractured quietly that morning, and it hadn't glued itself back. She reached across the table and touched my hand. "You're quiet tonight." "Just tired," I said again. I could see her looking at me, searching. I used to believe that was love. Now it felt like she was scanning for holes in my story, like we were both pretending we didn't hear the shift in tone, the crack in routine. She went to bed early, left her phone on the dresser, face down. I stayed up late pretending to read, but really, I was replaying the sound of her voice from that morning, the warmth in it, the way she said, "Wish I could have stayed longer." And I couldn't help but ask, where? When? With who? And why didn't I know? The next morning, I woke up before Lydia. That used to be normal. When we first moved in together, I'd be up early, go for a run, maybe make breakfast. She'd wander in later, still half asleep, and wrap herself around me like warmth itself. It had been a rhythm, a good one. But lately, that rhythm was off, like the instruments were the same, but the melody had changed. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, watching her. Hair splayed across the pillow, breathing soft and even. She looked peaceful, untouched. And yet, I couldn't shake the image of her voice from the hallway, gentle and secretive, like a person with 2 lives. I padded quietly into the kitchen. Her coffee mug from yesterday was gone. Washed, put away, no trace. I glanced at the dishwasher, still full from 2 days ago, meaning she'd cleaned it separately, manually. Another small detail. It was always the small things that eventually gave people away. The first real inconsistency came 2 days later. Lydia was headed out for yoga. Her mat was slung over her shoulder like usual, leggings sharp, water bottle filled. But something didn't track. She usually went on Sundays. This was Wednesday morning. Didn't know you were doubling up this week? I said casually, biting into toast. She froze for half a second. Most wouldn't have noticed. I did. Yeah, she said, tying her hair up, just trying to stay consistent. I've been feeling stiff lately. I nodded. Which studio? She grabbed her keys. Oh, same one as Sunday. I didn't say anything then, but I took note. She hadn't named it. Normally she would have, at least the location. She liked describing the instructors, which ones were intense, which ones had playlists that didn't **ck. But lately, no details. Just placeholders. That same afternoon, I checked the mileage on her car. Don't ask me why, I didn't have a fully formed theory. It was just a gut check. A number. Last Sunday, I'd happened to glance at the odometer as we parked at the grocery store. Seared into my brain unintentionally. Today, it read almost 130 miles more. The yoga studio was 5 miles away. Round trip, 10. Even with errands, that number didn't add up. And just like that, the map started to form. Not a literal one, but the kind that lives inside your head. A map of inconsistencies, of wrong turns and altered routes. You don't need a destination to know when you're not on the right path. That night, I watched her plug in her phone before bed. Face down again. A new habit about 3 weeks old. She used to leave it face up, always buzzing, always lighting up with Slack, Instagram, whatever. Now the screen stayed black. I asked about it once, jokingly. Sick of seeing all the nonsense, she said with a grin. I turned previews off. Too many distractions. It made sense. People do that. But still. Later that week, I caught a whiff of cologne on one of her sweaters. The tan one I never liked. The one she always wore when running errands alone. It didn't smell like mine. Not even close. Something musky. Woodsy. Not unpleasant, but foreign. I asked gently. She shrugged. Probably from a cab. Or that new guy at the office. Chris something. He wears way too much of it. Chris something. I remembered that name later when I looked at her Venmo history. 2 transfers. One for lunch and one for conference ticket. Both to a Chris Dalton. Both on days when she'd said she was working from home. The yoga sessions continued. So did the client meetings, which she'd started sprinkling into weekends. Her laptop had a new passcode. The old one, our dog's name, back when we had one, no longer worked. I asked her why. Work compliance, she said, not missing a beat. New protocol from legal. All devices locked down. Reasonable. Plausible. Too smooth. A week later, her engagement ring was gone again. She had taken it off for cleaning 2 weeks earlier. Then wore it once, briefly, to dinner with my parents. That night she'd commented on how it still wasn't fitting quite right. I offered to get it resized again. She said she'd handle it. It hadn't been seen since. On Friday, I walked past her home office and saw her quickly minimize a browser tab. Just fast enough to trigger a response. That too quick motion people do when they're not supposed to be seen doing something. I asked what she was working on. Presentation decks, she said. PowerPoint. Yeah. I'm not sure why, but I checked the browser history later. It was clean. Wiped. Entire session cleared. Even the tabs I knew she had open earlier, Google Docs, our shared calendar, gone. Saturday brought the gifts. Small ones. A bottle of my favorite bourbon. A new tie I'd mentioned once in passing. Takeout from the Korean place across town that she usually avoided because it made her smell like garlic for days. The sudden attentiveness might have felt sweet if it hadn't come right after 3 days of emotional distance. It was like she was painting over something, reglazing the surface. A surge of affection after a period of subtle withdrawal. I tried to mirror her, asked more questions, reached out physically, tried to bridge the space. She responded, but it felt off. Like she was reciting the steps of an old dance we'd forgotten how to perform together. Then came the money. Small transfers. Some through Venmo. Some through Zelle. A few marked project supplies. Others with vague one-word notes like split or thanks. Always to the same name, Chris Dalton. I didn't want to believe it. Maybe they were work expenses. Maybe she was planning something. A gift. A surprise. Maybe I was being paranoid. But that's the thing about suspicion. It starts as a whisper, a flicker, then it feeds on patterns, on the things that don't line up. Sunday morning, I said I'd join her for yoga. She blinked. What? I repeated myself casually, thinking I should stretch more. Mind if I come along? She hesitated. They're full today. Reservation-based. You have to sign up a week in advance. I'll call. Maybe they've got a no-show. There's a wait list, she said, almost too quickly. They're strict about it. I nodded. Let it drop. But when she left, I waited exactly 20 minutes, then called the studio. I told them I'd heard good things, asked about Sunday classes. The receptionist was cheerful. Plenty of space this morning, she said. Walk-ins are totally fine. I didn't go. I didn't follow. Not yet. Instead, I sat in her empty office and stared at the calendar on the wall. Half the squares had tiny color-coded labels. Most marked W, work. A few marked S, social. But one box, the day she said she'd been out with friends last month, had no label. Just a heart symbol, drawn in pen. Not like her. I opened the drawer. Inside were receipts, she always kept them. Travel ones, especially. Most were benign. Gas stations, coffee shops. But one stood out. A boutique hotel. One city over. A midweek date. Room service. 2 entrees. 1 bottle of Syrah. No note. No explanation. She never mentioned that trip. And just like that, the map of suspicion was no longer a sketch, it was a blueprint. Each inconsistency had a shadow. Each missing hour had a matching detail. The miles. The messages. The missing ring. The perfume. The transfers. Each alone, maybe nothing. Together, unmistakable. The night it all came together started like any other weekday. Lydia mentioned a team outing, a small happy hour for one of her coworkers' birthdays. She sounded casual, almost dismissive, as she slipped her earrings on. Don't wait up, she said lightly, fastening one clasp while checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. It's just a few drinks. A red dress, one I'd never seen before. It was elegant but bold, something she wouldn't normally wear for an office hangout. My first thought was that she looked stunning. My second was that she didn't look like she was dressing for work colleagues. The way she checked the fit, the subtle perfume cloud that followed her through the hallway, it all had intent written across it. Where's the party? I asked, pretending to scroll through my phone. She grabbed her clutch. The Copper Fox. Downtown. You know it, it's near the art district. I nodded, forcing a neutral expression. Oh yeah, good spot. I waited until I heard the sound of her car fade down the street before I pulled my jacket on. I already knew where she was going. The small tracking device in her glove compartment, a discreet black rectangle no bigger than a lighter, had been sitting there for a week. I debated removing it a dozen times, but my gut told me to leave it. Tonight, that instinct finally had purpose. Her car stopped moving at 7:12 p.m. The Copper Fox, just as she said. By 7:30, I was parked a block away. I could see the bar's warm glow spilling onto the sidewalk, gold light bouncing off the windows. Inside, the hum of laughter and clinking glasses carried into the street. It looked harmless enough. Just a weekday evening, people unwinding after work. I found a table by the window, out of her direct line of sight. The bar was all dark wood and exposed brick, the kind of place that tried hard to look effortlessly vintage. Jazz murmured from unseen speakers, low enough to let conversations overlap in a constant hum. At 7:45, she walked in. She looked composed, confident. The red dress caught the light with every step. Her hair was pinned back just enough to expose the small scar on her neck, the one she got years ago while biking. She scanned the room, smiling in that way that made strangers look twice. Then her expression softened as her eyes found someone near the back booth. A man stood up. He was tall, about my height, mid-30s, clean-cut. But what caught me wasn't his face. It was the tattoo on his wrist. A minimal line design, a half-wave curling into a triangle. I'd seen it before. Months ago, in a hidden album in her iCloud. an image I stumbled on when she asked me to fix her phone storage issue. The album name had been innocuous, Design References. I'd opened it out of curiosity. Most pictures were mood boards and typography samples. But one was a cropped photo of that tattoo, focus sharp, lighting deliberate. Now I was seeing it in person. He greeted her with a hug that lingered just past friendly. She placed her hand on his arm, casual but familiar. They slid into the booth. Drinks arrived quickly, 2 old fashions, the kind she used to order with me on Fridays. She hadn't ordered one in months. Said she'd gone off whiskey. From where I sat, I could see everything. The way she leaned in when she spoke, the small touch on his hand when she laughed. Body language doesn't lie. Even without sound, I could read it. Comfort, trust, and * Macy. I'd imagined this moment before, how it would feel to see confirmation. I thought I'd rage, or maybe collapse. But as I sat there, something colder took over. A detached clarity, like a scientist observing an experiment reaching its inevitable conclusion. The bartender came by to ask if I wanted another drink. I hadn't touched the first one. Just water, I said. My voice barely sounded like mine. Across the room, she was animated, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months. Every motion was effortless, unrehearsed, genuine. I realized painfully that I'd forgotten what that version of her looked like, the woman who used to look at me that way. He reached across the table, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't pull away, didn't even flinch. Instead, she tilted slightly toward him, closing the distance by an inch that said everything I needed to know. My mind began assembling details, dates, excuses, receipts. The missing ring, the yoga sessions, the Venmo transfers to Chris Dalton. It clicked into place with surgical precision. This was him, the man from the payments, the one who existed in small digital traces and sudden absences, the phantom behind every client dinner and work emergency. There was a part of me, small, trembling, that hoped I was wrong, that maybe I'd misunderstood, that this was still salvageable. But then she reached for his hand across the table. Their fingers intertwined, and that tiny flicker of hope died quietly, like a match in the wind. I stared long enough for the moment to brand itself into memory. I wanted to be sure I'd never doubt it later, never question whether it had really happened. Every sound in the room faded except the ice shifting in my untouched glass. I stood up. No dramatic confrontation, no scene, just a quiet exit. The truth didn't need words. It had already been spoken through gestures and glances. I walked out the front door and into the night air, my pulse steady, almost too calm. The city noise swallowed me as I moved down the block. My phone buzzed with a notification from the tracker, her car still parked in the same spot. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. By the time I reached my car, the cold clarity had crystallized into resolve. There was no room for bargaining anymore. The evidence wasn't circumstantial. It was undeniable. I sat behind the wheel for several minutes, letting the silence fill every corner of the car. No shouting, no grief yet, just logic, procedure. The part of my brain that once built business strategies now worked through emotional logistics instead. What to cancel, what to secure, what to reclaim. At 8:42 p.m. I drove home. The streets were blurred streaks of light, my thoughts precise and mechanical. I wasn't replaying the scene. I was cataloging it. The dress, the tattoo, the time, the name of the bar etched on the napkin. Proof. When I entered the house, everything looked exactly as it had when she'd left. The faint smell of her perfume still hung in the hallway, her coat draped neatly on the rack. The illusion of normal life waiting for its next act. But the performance was over. I walked into the office and sat at my desk, opening a blank page on my laptop. My hands trembled slightly as I began typing. Not a message, but a list. Tasks, timelines, steps to take in the morning. I labeled the document transition plan. At the top, I wrote a single line. No confrontation, only closure. Then I saved it. And for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. The morning after the Copper Fox felt like the aftermath of a storm no one else had noticed. The city moved at its usual pace. Delivery trucks growling, commuters half awake. But inside our house, everything was unnaturally still. Lydia's side of the bed was empty. A text on my phone read, "Stayed at Jamie's after drinks. Too tired to drive. See you later, love you." I stared at the message until the words blurred. Love you. Those two words, dropped in like punctuation, felt like an insult now. There was no explosion, no shouting match. Just quiet efficiency. I brewed coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened the transition plan file I'd written last night. It looked cold, almost clinical, with bullet points and timestamps, like I was managing an audit rather than dismantling my life. But the structure steadied me. Logic was the only thing that made sense anymore. I started with the practical. Freeze joint checking and savings. Change online banking passwords. Remove her from credit cards. Cancel the shared travel rewards account. Redirect all statements to my private email. Every click of the mouse felt like reclaiming air I hadn't realized she'd been taking. By noon, I was on the phone with our bank's fraud department, explaining that I wanted to restrict dual access. The representative, polite but curious, asked if there'd been suspicious activity. Yes, I said evenly. Just preventative. When Lydia texted around lunch, "Back in meetings. Want sushi tonight?" I didn't reply. I didn't trust myself to craft a neutral answer. Instead, I went room by room with a quiet determination, collecting what belonged to her. The robe from that morning, the one she'd worn during the work call, folded into a suitcase. Her yoga mat, her laptop bag, the framed photo of us from a winery trip, her favorite candle set from the living room shelf. Every item went into neat categories. Personal, shared, replaceable. It wasn't anger guiding me. It was precision. A controlled burn of emotion reduced to motion. At one point, I found myself holding a scarf of hers, deep green, soft cashmere. I remembered buying it in Chicago 2 winters ago, when she'd leaned against me under a street lamp, laughing about how I couldn't tie it right. For a second, something inside me cracked. The memory still had weight, even if the woman in it no longer existed in the same way. I folded the scarf, placed it gently on top of the suitcase, and zipped it shut. Then I opened her laptop. It asked for a password, of course. But I'd noticed before that Lydia's system hint read, blue_sky. I typed it, then blue sky, then blue_sky 22. On the 4th try, it opened. The desktop was immaculate, too immaculate. A single folder labeled work. Inside it, subfolders dated and color-coded. But the timestamps betrayed her. The Greystone pitch file, supposedly last week's project, hadn't been modified in over a month. Instead, a hidden folder buried under System Preferences caught my eye. Archive_2. Inside photos, receipts, *TS, messages. I didn't scroll far, just far enough to see one image of her and the man from the bar. The same tattooed wrist, the same red dress, her head on his shoulder, both smiling like the world had vanished around them. I closed the laptop slowly. My heartbeat didn't even spike. The proof wasn't a shock anymore. It was confirmation of what I already knew. I deleted my fingerprints from her device and set it aside. Then I made another list. Remove her from house security access. Collect spare keys. Cancel upcoming flights. San Francisco, conference, Vermont, anniversary weekend. Redirect mail to my office. Contact landlord about lease transfer. By evening, I had executed every task. The house looked the same, yet the air felt different. Emptier, cleaner, somehow truer. When she finally came home around 7, I was sitting at the kitchen table, a small stack of envelopes beside me. She looked startled to see me. "Hey," she said carefully. "You're home early. I thought we could talk." Her eyes flicked to the table, where her packed suitcase sat like a silent accusation. "What's this?" "Your things," I said. "Mostly personal. I labeled what's shared, you can take whatever you need." She blinked, processing. Ethan, what's going on? I didn't answer right away. I wanted to choose words that couldn't be twisted. I saw you last night. Her body went rigid. The color drained from her face. What do you mean? The copper fox. A pause, long enough to hear the refrigerator hum. Her lips parted slightly. Then, like a switch flipping, she drew a breath and forced calm into her voice. It's not what you think. I almost smiled at the predictability of it. It's exactly what I think, I said. And you know it. She stepped closer, eyes wide with a practiced fragility. Ethan, please, can we just sit and talk about this? You've misunderstood. No, I said quietly. I didn't. I gestured toward the note on the table. A single page typed and signed. Simple instructions. How to contact me for her belongings, how to transfer utilities, where to send forwarding addresses. Beneath it, her house key and access card rested neatly. Her voice wavered. You're serious? I'm done, I said. No shouting. No drama. Just done. She sank into a chair, shaking. You can't just end everything like this. I can, I replied. And I am. For a moment, the mask slipped. The calm professional tone vanished, replaced by something raw, fear, maybe, or guilt. She reached for me, but I stepped back. Please, she whispered. It was a mistake. Don't, I said firmly. Don't rewrite it now. I picked up the envelopes, bank statements, legal forms, her employment contract, and slid them across the table. You'll want to handle these before the end of the week. Her hands trembled as she took them. You planned this? Yes, I said. Last night. She looked around the house. The clean counters, the absence of her things, and realization dawned. You've already erased me. No, I said softly. You did that. There was no shouting, no apology that could rewind time. She sat there silently, tears starting to trace lines down her face. I didn't feel triumph, just exhaustion. When she finally stood to leave, she paused at the doorway. You're really not going to fight for this? I already did, I said. You just weren't here for it. The door closed gently behind her. Afterward, I walked through the house one last time. Every room looked neutral now, stripped of attachment. I locked the door, set her suitcase by the entryway for courier pickup, and exhaled. The act felt like shutting down a chapter in a book I no longer wanted to read. That night, I drafted one final document, a memo addressed to myself, a reminder of boundaries. Do not contact her again. Do not seek closure. The facts are sufficient. I printed it and pinned it to the corkboard above my desk. A strange sense of order returned, like cleaning after a spill you'd pretended wasn't there. Outside, rain began tapping lightly against the windows. For the first time in months, I didn't reach for my phone. I just listened. It sounded like peace. 3 days after Lydia left, I called Richard Carter. It wasn't an emotional decision. It was a business one, cold, necessary, and long overdue. Richard wasn't just Lydia's father. He was my co-investor on 3 venture syndicates and the most tactically disciplined man I'd ever worked with. We met during a mid-stage cleantech pitch 2 years ago. He liked the way I structured term sheets. I liked the way he didn't waste time. We'd been aligned ever since, until Lydia became the variable that complicated everything. That part was never supposed to matter, but now it did. We met at his private office, a quiet, unbranded suite tucked behind a real estate firm in the Marina District. He preferred it that way. No nameplate on the door, just a frosted window and a buzzer. He greeted me with a firm nod. No handshake. Ethan. Richard. We sat in silence for a beat. He didn't ask why I called. He already knew. I assume this isn't about the Whitestone round, he said. No, I replied. It's about Lydia. His jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I pulled a slim folder from my bag and placed it on the table between us. This is not a personal complaint. It's a disclosure. He opened it without hesitation. Inside were printed screensh *TS, transaction logs, calendar anomalies, the photo from the copper fox. A few discrete notations highlighted the overlaps. It wasn't emotional proof. It was behavioral mapping. He flipped through it all in silence, eyes scanning the data. His poker face held steady, but I saw it. The faint flicker of disappointment, maybe even embarrassment. Not shock, though. That said more than I wanted to know. When he finished, he closed the folder slowly. You traced her. I verified her, I corrected. After she started hiding patterns. Did you confront her? Yes. I didn't escalate it. No legal action? Not unless I'm dragged into a corner. He nodded once. Clean exit. Clean, I confirmed. I've already severed joint accounts, transferred passwords, rerouted holdings. Nothing shared remains. Another long pause. He tapped a finger against the folder's spine, then finally said, I'm sorry. Caught me off guard. Richard Carter was not a man who said things he didn't mean, and he certainly wasn't the type to offer apologies. Not even when the market burned. I raised her better, he added. I didn't come here for remorse, I said. I came with an alternative. I slid a second folder across the table. This one wasn't about Lydia. It was about Brooks Integrity Capital. He opened it with more curiosity than before. Inside was a one-page summary, lean, concise, and airtight. A fund proposal focused on early-stage startups operating under verified ESG compliance. Every metric traceable. Every pitch scored through a zero-favor diligence model. No insider tracks. No family and friends pipelines. I want this to exist, I said, keeping my voice measured. I wanted to prove that clean money and clean decisions aren't mutually exclusive. He read the first half in silence, pausing at the cap table structure. You're rejecting institutional backing? In phase 1, I don't want anyone leveraging politics in exchange for runway. He didn't smile, but his lip twitched, his version of approval. What are you asking from me? Silent support. No branding. No Carter connections. Just a seed anchor from a party I trust to stay in the shadows. Terms. You'll get your preferred return, I said, plus a 15% carry cap. But I control founder alignment. No board seats. That's steep, he said. So is trust, I replied. He closed the folder, studied me. Why come to me? Because I know you're more invested in your legacy than your last name, I said quietly. And because I'm giving you a way to move forward without making noise. He didn't answer right away. He stood and walked to the window, arms crossed behind his back. She was always good at hiding, he said. Even as a child. She used to rearrange the truth, never lied directly, just redirected. I assumed it would serve her well. It did, I said. For a while. He turned back to me. You're not going public with this? No, I said. If I wanted scandal, I'd have burned the house down by now. I want distance. And leverage. He considered that. Then he nodded, walked back to his desk, and unlocked the drawer beneath it. He pulled out a checkbook, yes, an actual one, and filled it out with swift, practiced strokes. This gets you to phase 1, he said, tearing the slip with precise care. But if you go soft or dilute the ethics, I pull out. Understood. He held out the check, but didn't release it. This conversation never happened. It didn't, I said. We exchanged a final look. Mutual respect, minimal emotion, and the understanding that we'd both protected something that mattered more than pride. Credibility. I walked out with the check folded once in my wallet and the silent backing of a man who knew exactly what betrayal cost, on both sides of the line. By the end of the week, Brooks Integrity Capital was officially incorporated. I filed through a solo vehicle, set up the banking infrastructure with triple verification protocols, and built a clean data room using nothing Lydia had ever touched. I worked out of a temporary office sublet, just a whiteboard, a folding table, and a MacBook. No team, no signage, just quiet work. The first portfolio criteria were brutal. 5 filters, all pass-fail. Founders needed proof of transparency, actual open books, not curated slide decks. I ran background checks personally. No shortcuts. Every founder I spoke with asked the same question. Where did you come from? I gave the same answer each time. Doesn't matter. What matters is what comes next. By week 2, I had 4 warm leads and 1 signed intent from a clean tech logistics company operating out of Ohio. No hype, no PR. Just metrics and motion. Lydia didn't reach out. Not directly. But 2 emails came in from her, both unsigned, both short. The first, "I know you saw us. I'm sorry." The second, a day later, "I didn't mean to break it like this. I didn't know how to undo it." I archived them without replying. Not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to say. Her actions were not a puzzle. They were a choice, pattern, a path she followed quietly until it ended in consequence. Closure didn't come through her apology. Came through her absence. The more distance I built, the more clarity emerged. The fund became a mirror of everything I wished the relationship had been: transparent, rigorous, and built on actual intention. No signals, just action. I rented a small 2-room suite to convert into a long-term workspace. Nothing flashy, just sunlight, good acoustics, and white boards that begged to be filled. I didn't decorate. I didn't need to. One night, I stayed late, scribbling metric frameworks across the wall. I paused to look at what I'd written. Underneath the columns and key terms, I saw a single word, unintentionally circled. Integrity. It wasn't a slogan. It wasn't branding. It was a line I wouldn't cross again for anyone. And for the first time in weeks, I believed it. Lydia's emails came, brief, apologetic, and unanswered. I finalized dissolving our financial and legal ties, had her belongings couriered, and focused solely on the fund. In silence, I rebuilt structure from scratch. Lean systems, ethical partnerships, and transparent reporting. Each clean decision was a form of control regained. The more she faded, the clearer the mission became. No contact, no chaos, just movement forward. At a Denver conference, I crossed paths with Hannah, Lydia's younger sister. We spoke professionally at first, aligning on sustainability initiatives. Over time, our collaboration deepened. Diligence checks, founder referrals, team vetting. No pretense, just mutual focus and calm. 6 months in, the fund was thriving. Trust was redefined not by words but by action. Her betrayal hadn't destroyed me. It cleared the space to build something honest.